Mr Tremaine, you might still be suffering under a mystery by the end of the session today, because I suspect this legislation won't go to a division either. But so you might have to wait. Mr Speaker, as the Attorney General has said, this is a piece of mechanical legislation which nonetheless is very important. It relates to the rules that go to ensuring the integrity of our legislation. I think the Law Commission put it very well when it said this in their report. The state has an obligation to make law accessible to citizens. People have to obey the law. Ignorance of it is no excuse. So they need to be able to find it and understand it. They will not respect the law if they cannot. Moreover, law which is not accessible is expensive in terms of both time and money. So the objective of this legislation is to make sure that the law is accessible to people and that it's reliable. The way in which we print it is a reliable form as to the content of what we have in this House of Parliament passed. I want to deal with a couple of the issues that the Attorney General has touched upon. The issue of amendments being able to be made on reprints by the Parliamentary Council, Chief Parliamentary Council, Clause 25 of the bill, or Clause 24 of the bill, says that changes authorised by Clauses 25 and 26 may be made in a reprint. It says that they do not permit any change of text that changes the effect of the provision, and of course we all agree that that's an appropriate intention. And then in clauses 25 and 26 it sets out some examples of changes. Clause 26 deals with changes to format. That's probably less contentious than some of the, or less potentially contentious than some of the changes that are made pursuant to clause 25. These things are apparently simple, but at times will be difficult because the changes that are permitted to be made include unnecessary, include changing punctuation so as to be consistent with current drafting practice. Well, that's an admirable ambition, but actually, as Mr Garrett and I'm sure the Attorney will agree, there are at times changes to punctuation which will be changing the ambiguity of legislation. We do have legislation that's currently ambiguous, and it will be interesting to see whether, faced with the ambiguity, whether the Parliamentary Office tries to fix it. I would suggest they ought not to. I think it's actually for Parliament to fix ambiguity. It's not for the parliamentary staff to actually choose which of the two meanings they think is appropriate. So goes one example where we need to take a wee bit of care in the drafting of this and have a bit of a think as to whether we've got the actual wording of this clause 25 in the bill quite right. Conjunctives and disjunctives may be inserted, omitted or changed so as to be consistent with current drafting practice. Well, again, I'm sure the Attorney will have had similar experience to me in finding conjunctions that are currently used as and mean or, does or mean and depending on whether or is used in a way that means and or whether it means or, the meaning of the statute is different. So again, we have to be a bit careful that we're not giving a carte blanche to the authorities to change that in the case of what they might see as ambiguity, because Parliament might have intended something different. And I think if there is ambiguity, then it's for the courts to resolve that, and if the courts resolve that in a way that Parliament doesn't like, then it's for Parliament to change the law. And if we don't like the ambiguity in the meantime, then it's up to us to change the law. We ought not to be relying on parliamentary draftspeople to do it. There are some other changes here that are made. I like the idea that we're going to be moving to a more regular, systematic revision of acts. I think that's a good thing. It's made easier these days because of electronic technologies. We might as well take advantage of those of those changes in technology and move to that more systematic system of revising acts. and, as the Attorney said, including in those reprints all of the amendments that have been made to the Act, rather than asking people who are reading those Acts to read the principal Act and then separately to refer to an Amendment Act for a provision which is not caught by an annotation, because it's not a minor change to an existing Act, but indeed it's a substantive change. I beg your pardon? Handwritten annotations always cause problems.
Order. Debates through the chair. We're not having something.
Mr. Speaker, one of the other changes that's being proposed is a change to the modern drafting style. I'm not sure that all of this is progress, Mr. Attorney. In fact, he may know one of my former partners, Stuart Walker, was being one of the leading proponents of plain English drafting for decades, and he and I were sadly, I have to admit, talking about this very issue a couple of months ago, lamenting the fact that maybe it's because we're used to the current style of drafting. We actually find some of the drafting devices that are being used by PCO these days harder to understand than the prior versions. So they might be briefer, but they're harder to understand. So that's not something we can probably fix through this legislation, but we do need to take care that the ambition here is easily understood legislation, and to the extent that we can make it simpler, that's good, but the greater and more important objective is clarity. And so we ought not to pursue simplicity to the extent that we sacrifice clarity of meaning. Mr. Speaker, the other changes that are made to the Act are largely updating the existing legislation. I don't think that I can spin this out to 10 minutes, and so I think that at that point I will just resort to saying that I'm somewhat surprised that in a government that's got such a big wage gap with Australia, we're actually not debating something of somewhat more important economic input. This will be important economically. Mr. Finlayson says, well, I'm not denying that it has some importance, but I don't think it's going to cause a substantial bridging of the wage gap with Australia. So on that note, sir, the Labour Party will be supporting this bill to select committee.
I call Chester Borrows.
Thank you.